Welcome to the From Full podcast, where we talk about living from fullness and not for it. I'm glad you joined us today, and I hope this brings you some encouragement. Welcome back to the From Full podcast. It's been a little while since our last episode.
Yep, almost 5 months.
Crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's going really fast.
It has. So 5 months ago, we shared with you our crazy faith jump episode where we talked about how God had asked us to leave Brett's full-time work behind.
Yep.
Which was
crazy.
Yes, that's the word I was looking for. It was crazy. It felt crazy. It felt terrifying. It's not the first jump he's taken us through. He's had me transition into different jobs that felt impossible before, but this was the first time we've ever gone to no guaranteed income, which was really unsettling. And to be honest with you, when we recorded that episode, we didn't know what life would look like 5 months later.
No, it's just a faith jump.
Yeah. And I don't know how to put it into words really, but it's been hard. It's been good. And we're still here.
Yeah, it's mainly been good though.
Mainly good, yeah. And we still have a house.
Yep.
And our kids are doing well. We haven't killed each other being around each other 24/7.
Yep.
So life is good. Life is good, and he's provided.
Yeah, he's brought a lot of friends to us as well, and our freezers are fuller than it's ever been.
Yeah, he's been good.
He's been very good.
So today we just thought we would come and share a little update with y'all. And we've really been wanting to get back into podcasting anyway. Right. And Brett actually wanted to push us to the next level and start doing some videos. He's always wanting me to go out of my comfort zone. So this is our first practice video podcast. First official one, I guess. We did one on the love languages not very long ago for our group.
Yep. For your page, yep.
Yes, but this is the first one that we're sharing on the podcast. Mm-hmm. So we'll see how it goes.
Yep.
Okay. So let's just share a little bit about some things God has taught us over the last 5 months of being home together and just following him day by day.
Okay.
So I just took a couple notes. The first thing that I thought I would share that was at the beginning of all this, I felt like God kept saying to me, I want you to make room for me to move. And you were hearing that too, weren't you?
Yeah.
It was important to make room. That's what the letting go of that job was about.
Yeah, and he kept giving me this vision of this calendar that was just totally blank. There's nothing there, so he could just put himself wherever he wanted to put him within that calendar. Then I could just fill it up with all the other things that we need to do in life. But first and foremost, I had to make room for him first. Right.
And it feels like that's kind of impossible nowadays, isn't it?
It is.
I think we make so many excuses like, God, I could give you this corner of my life or, this time on Fridays. But to just completely clear your calendar and say, okay, God, take whatever chunk you want. And, if you want me to work, show me where to fit that in, but it's all yours. It's all yours. That is so difficult, I think. But it's been cool. We're still not perfect at it. We still tend to fill ourselves back up.
Yeah.
And so it's just constantly being refreshed, I guess. We're learning that too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I noticed that my human nature is to start filling things back up. And I have this tendency to want to present myself, especially as we're sharing this journey and, somewhat reliant. I don't want to say reliant on people because we rely on God, right, but somewhat at the mercy of people to help and to support us and to be alongside us in this journey. And our society kind of has this tendency when you're in a position like that to need to come across polished and perfect and you have a plan, you have your stuff all together. Yeah. And so that has been an underlying pressure for me because I'll just be honest, I don't have anything together. This isn't about my plan. This was never in my plans. If you would have asked us the beginning of our marriage, what are your plans for your life? This was nowhere on the radar. But it's awesome, and I think that it's turning out better than what we had planned for our own life.
Yeah, and it really works out. And it's one of those things that you don't think it'll work out when you're younger, but as you walk with God throughout these things, you notice that it was better for you. It was better for your life and your marriage and your family and extended family. It just he takes you through paths that you don't quite understand. at the beginning, but as you go through them, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So, as I was thinking about this and about how we want to come across as if we have this perfect plan, the verse in Proverbs 16:9, it really jumped out at me. And so Brett has pulled it up in his Bible, and he's just going to read it for us.
So Proverbs 16:9 of the New Living Translation reads, "We can make our plans, but the Lord determines our steps."
Right. And so there have been a lot of seasons in my life where I've just paused and I'm like, okay, God, let's just sit down. I want to listen to you. I want to prayerfully plan with you. This is what I think you want us to do in this next season of life, and lay those plans out. Yeah. But the problem is, like, as we get into that and as we walk it and as we're taking those steps, often it doesn't always look or feel exactly like the pretty version that we saw in those plans we journaled out with him, does it?
No.
Like, there's just this gap there. And I don't know how to describe it other than I've shared that feeling, like, on Facebook with some of my friends, and others have definitely echoed those sentiments. There is some kind of chasm in between the planning and the stepping that is just so maddening. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So anyway, we're having to learn how to prayerfully flow forward with him then also, like letting him direct our steps, and when we get tripped up, letting him help us back up, whether that's we're just tripping over each other because we're around each other all the time and we're not the same people at all. So
not at all.
Yeah, even like trying to sit down and do this together, we just prepare differently, and we prepare differently for youth group and things like that. So when we get tripped up between each other or just our own feelings, he's always there to help pick us back up. And then even in a good way, like, you know, when things are going really good and actually like opportunities come up and we're like, oh, that sounds great, allowing him to direct our steps and tell us what to say yes to and what to say no to, because we have to leave that margin in our lives for him.
Yep.
So, and I've noticed that there's been a lot of that too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So.
Most definitely.
But I think it's kind of like parenting, because, you know, when we were engaged and we're thinking about becoming parents, right? Like, it's easy to have this vision of what everything's going to be. And you don't account for, like, oh, there's issues like with your baby learning to breastfeed, or, you know, there's like some sleepless nights or any of that. Like, when we think about our next step, we don't typically account for the hard things.
Right.
But we also don't know, like, how awesome the good parts are going to be. So, yeah, I guess for me, that was just kind of a parallel, like, for life in general. Like, always there's going to be some unexpected stuff pop up, sure. But it's good. Like, he's good in all of it.
Yeah, he helps us roll with it.
He does. Okay, so some of the lessons that we've learned, and I think we're just going to try to go over these briefly, but I don't know. We're just flowing with this today, and maybe we'll dive deeper into each of them for future episodes, but I don't know. He's directing our steps, so we'll see what happens.
Yep. Let's get into it.
Yeah. Okay, so the first thought I noted down for today was you don't just jump from birth to full-grown children, right? Like, and you don't just go from being pregnant with a ministry vision to having it all out and like perfectly running in 5 months either.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, like, I don't know, like I was sharing before, I really thought, you know, by 5 months in, I'm going to have my book all the way written, and we're going to have all these things that we shared with you in that crazy faith jump episode that God had put on our heart for the next season of life. I really thought he was going to do all of them in the next literal season, as in 3 months, and can be hard on myself and be like, oh, God, I messed up. And he's like, Daylene, I just mapped out the rest of your life, and you wanted to fit it into 3 months. So, yeah, I'm just learning that. All right, so another lesson that we learned is that we can't put him in a box. So, and we can't put ministry in a box either. And I asked him why this was, and actually what he shared with me was that it's just because we're not in charge. Like, we aren't the leaders, we're the followers. But I feel like when we go into ministry, we sometimes can go in with the mindset that like, oh, all right, it's my turn to lead other people now. But that's actually not what we feel like we're called to at all. If we lead as a byproduct, that's great. But really what we're doing is following God. So if we can teach others to follow God by us following God, awesome. That's bonus. But the goal of our life isn't to lead other people. The goal of our life is just to follow Jesus. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think actually sitting down and preparing for this podcast helped me, because sometimes it's easy to forget that. And sometimes it's easy to put this weight on you of like, there are people out there who are not saved or who want to know how to follow Jesus better. And you can sometimes take on that responsibility of like leading them. And it can get heavy and like daunting a little bit. But then like when he reminded me as I was sitting down to prepare for this, that like I don't have to be in charge of leading anybody. I just follow him and hope that they will be encouraged to follow him too.
Right.
It was a lot lighter. Another thing I would say is that sometimes we want God to always work beautifully through our strengths. And he doesn't always. Like, I think he often chooses to work through our weaknesses. Does that make sense? Or yeah. So I thought we could share a couple examples today of like how he's worked through some of our weaknesses in the last 5 months. So would you be willing to share like the sock story? And I will frame this story by saying that I have been at home or working from home for about 7 years now. And I learned after a good couple of months that laundry is a battle that I cannot win. I cannot win. And I just wasn't willing to try it after a few months. And especially socks. Like, we just had so many socks. And so after a few months, I just got a basket and put on the top of our dryer. And that was the sock basket. And it sat there for probably a good 7 years before Brett came home. And what happened within the first week you were home?
So I just got this urge to come down and just made all the socks. All of them. Like the entire basket, guys. There was just so many socks in there. So I made them all. And I was able to split them up into the ones that we actually wear, and I put them into another basket, and then I put the rest of them into another box. And I said, we need to get rid of these. I don't care what we do with them, donate them. And she's like, oh, yeah, we can put them in the cabinet that we have at our church. So we'll drop them off sometime, whenever we get a chance. So one night you had an urge to go to the store for something.
Well, it's just so weird. Yeah. First of all, it was weird that you had this crazy urge to take care of the socks out of all the projects in our house. Like, and it had to be done like right then. Yeah, socks. We were butting heads actually about this. About socks, right. But it was so important to you in this moment. And then I had thrown them in, like I was tired of seeing the bag, and I threw it in my car. And I'm like, okay, if I take my nephew and niece to school and I see this in my car, I'm going to go take it to the church for our cabinet that sits outside, which is basically for anybody to come get food who needs it, or we stick some clothes in there sometimes and people can just come and get it freely. So it was my intention to take it that morning, but I didn't. I think I was stressing out that day and just didn't feel like it and came home. And later that night, I had failed to make dinner and I was craving, of all things, generic Kroger brand Rice Krispies. It was very specific. And I asked Brett, like, will you go with me to this store? And it felt ridiculous, but he actually said yeah. And it was at 10 o'clock at night probably. Mm-hmm. And we go to get in the car, and then I'll let you share the rest of what happened after that. Yeah,
so then we decided that, we're out. Let's go ahead and drop these socks off at the church. This is late. Like you said, it was probably around 10 o'clock at night, maybe a little bit later. So we get to the church, and we're getting ready to put the socks in, and there was a lady there that we're pretty certain she was homeless. And there was one thing in particular that she was really hoping was in that cabinet, and of course, it was socks.
Yeah, it was so crazy.
It was very cold. It was wet out. We was getting into the winter season, and she desperately needed socks, and we had a whole box full of socks.
Well, And it was so, I love how the conversation just played out too, because
Yeah.
first of all, I don't typically put stuff in the cabinet when there's somebody out there.
Right.
But right away, as we pulled up, I was thinking about pulling away, and I actually just asked her, like, do you need privacy? It's okay. Like, we can come back. And she's like, no, I don't mind. And she was starting conversation with us.
Yep.
And she's talking with me as I'm unloading these things. And I put some clothes in there. I put a few pairs of shoes in there. And she said, oh, this is so great. Thank you. But, you know, it's so funny. I was actually praying for socks today. I wish you had some socks. And I just started busting up laughing because the very next thing I was getting ready to pull out of the car was that entire box of socks that Brett had mated. And so, like, she teared up in that moment. I teared up because it was just so clear. Like, none of this was random. His urge to mate socks was not random. My ridiculous not cooking dinner and being hungry for Rice Krispies at 10 o'clock at night was not random. Like,
Right.
it was all of our weakness, but God used it to answer this woman's prayer. That was very specific.
Right. And it wasn't us. It was just us following the path that he laid out, that we had no idea what it was going to look like. So just by that urge of wanting to make socks ended up meeting the need of somebody else, but also getting to lay hands on her and pray with her as well.
Yes, because she was open to that, which is amazing, because not everybody is open to that. But she was like, God had prepared her heart and basically was like, I see you, I heard you, and I've
Right.
sent somebody directly for you. This was personal.
Right.
And I think it blessed me as much in that moment because, you know, like this woman even shared that she had like problems with homelessness and addiction, and yet God didn't care. He still like saw the need and met it and loved her just as much.
Right.
And to me, it spoke to me in that moment that like, even if I'm not perfect, even if I'm not as polished as I want to look in my ministry or in my life, or as we walk out this path of our crazy faith jump, even if I don't have it all together, he will still hear me and he will still send somebody to meet my needs.
Right.
And so that was like a perfectly timed just for both sides of it. And he works so many times just like that, where it blesses the receiver just as much as it blesses the giver.
Yep.
So that was just one
So
example
true.
of how he worked through our weaknesses. And I'm trying to think of some other times. Do you remember there was also that time when I was just stressed out? Like, I used to walk in anxiety pretty much all the time. And I feel like God really over the last couple of years has taken me from almost constant anxiety with just moments of peace to like pretty much I have peace with some anxiety that does try to pop up and I have to fight it with him. So he's kind of flip-flopped it. Is anxiety totally gone from my life? No. But it doesn't like control me as much as it used to. But for whatever reason, this day that I'm talking about, like anxiety just had hit me hard and I could not get settled. And I told my husband, like, I'm just going to have to go on a walk. I think I need to go on a walk. And I probably told you that, I don't know how many times, like a dozen or something, but just something kept preventing me from going. Like, I would just feel guilty or silly or like, oh, the kids need me, or like somebody would text me and then I would get squirreled and not go on the walk. And finally I'm like, I have to go. I just have to go. I don't know why I'm going to burst if I don't go. See ya. I'll be back soon. I love you. And I walk out the door and I pass one of our neighbors and I'm like, oh, it's a beautiful day, isn't it? It was right before Thanksgiving, I think. Like the day before Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, because I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're having like almost 60-degree weather the day before Thanksgiving. Isn't it beautiful? And she was like, yeah, it is so great. And she goes about her way and I pass another lady, you know, just a few minutes later, and I'm expecting the conversation to unroll the same way. And I was like, isn't this a beautiful day? So great for right before Thanksgiving. And she just burst into tears.
Right.
And I wasn't expecting it. I'm like, what's the matter? And she's sharing with me how like her husband and her were in an argument and he told her to leave and she wasn't sure where she was going to go. And it became pretty apparent, like within a few minutes of the conversation, that she maybe had some dementia going on. But I didn't want to jump to those conclusions. And so I asked her where she was going, if I could just walk with her. And she mentioned a first name. And I don't know how, other than God. It was just God. I knew who she was talking about, and I walked with her to that house, but they weren't home. Right. And so then I wasn't sure what to do because she didn't want to go back home, and I didn't know where else to take her. And she mentioned the first name of another person and just said, so-and-so's mom. Which was crazy because if I were anybody else, I wouldn't have known. And I normally wouldn't have known, except right. God just put the knowing in me. That's the best I can describe it. And I knew exactly who she was talking about. And even though I didn't have that person's phone number, they went to our church. And so my husband has started doing the church management software for our church. And he just happened to have the phone number at home. So I texted him, hey, I'm bringing somebody home. I need you to look up this phone number. I didn't really give him much explanation other than that. And he's like, okay.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Sure, right? That's very random. So we walk home, and she's a little unconsolable. So I fix her some lunch, and we just sit and visit with her for a little bit. And I called that friend from church and tried to determine if it was safe to take her back home or not. And we won't really get into the personal details of that. But I will say the minute that I prayed with this lady on the street, as soon as she was telling me that she wasn't okay, that anxiety just fell off me. I knew that it actually wasn't anxiety for myself. I know that God was planning and preparing my steps for those next moments to be exactly where I was needed to be. Yeah. And in the meantime, this woman's daughter had been praying for her, and it could have turned out so badly, but it didn't, because God was ahead of it, and he answers the prayers of his loved ones, and he puts people in our path when we need them and when we pray for somebody to be in our loved one's path. So yeah. I thought, just failure on my part, what's wrong with me? Why am I having this anxiety again? But he was using it all, even my imperfection, to just put me where I was needed at that time. Yeah. And so I think because of these things, and it's still not easy because I'd rather him work through my strengths, but it's getting a little easier to trust that he'll work in my weaknesses too.
Yeah.
Do you feel that way, as you've walked through it a little more?
Yeah, it teaches us to be humble.
Yeah. It's not about us and how well we can do what he's given us to do.
Yes.
It's just how submitted we are and how responsive we are, that when we see what he's doing, that we're okay, yeah, I can help with this.
Yep.
So it makes me want to tear up, actually, thinking about how good he is.
Yes.
So, yeah, and we have some more stories that we can share another day, but we want to keep this not super long. Right. And I could talk all day. If you know me, you know that's true. Yeah, even reviewing this beforehand, he's like, you were going through the whole episode, but different personalities. Yep. Okay, so another lesson we learned is that in the kingdom, it's not a deposit and a withdrawal system. So a lot of times in the world, you think about if you want something from a relationship, you have to pour something into that relationship. And we can almost get this attitude of entitlement. If I have served you, then I expect for you to pour back into me, right? Mm-hmm. Especially in marriages, we can be that way. But in the kingdom in general, where you pour in is often not where you'll get poured back into.
Right.
And I think that's just something that it was unsettling to learn, but it's good for us to learn. Yep. Because it helps us detach our giving and our receiving, I guess I would say. And I think more than anything in this season, we've learned to freely receive and we've learned to freely give.
Right.
And both of those things are kind of hard because, we're so programmed to when we give with some expectation that people are going to be thankful for it, or they're going to then when we need a blessing, they'll turn around and bless us.
Sure.
Or, it's hard because we can just put expectations on relationships.
Yeah. And for me, it's easier to give. I don't really have a problem with giving. It's the receiving part that I really struggle with. And if I do receive something, I feel like no matter where I am in life, okay, it's my duty to pay it back in some way. It's hard for me to just accept it as a gift. And God says, no, you ask for my provision and you will receive my provision. It's not something that you have to buy from others. This is something I'm gifting to you. And when I tell you and I say it's your turn to gift somebody else, you need to do it without expecting anything else in return.
Yeah, not even like a thank you.
Right.
Yes. That has been, like, the freely receiving has been equally as challenging as that freely giving.
Right.
Because especially when somebody gives to you and they don't have a lot.
Yeah.
It can be so easy to want to just say, no, thank you, like, you keep it. But actually, God really reprimanded me the one time that I was getting ready to do that and said, like, don't rob somebody of the blessings that will follow their obedience. Like, they want to bless you, and you know how much of a blessing it is when you get to be a part of blessing others. So don't rob them of that. And I was like, wow, I never really thought about it that way.
Yeah, we don't typically think of it that way, but that's a very good point, a good thing to remember.
Yeah, because when I go to give something to somebody, if they would say no, I'd almost be like, oh, like disappointed because I was so excited to give that.
Yeah, especially if you know God's the one that told you to, like, you're not just giving it because you want to give it. You felt prompted to do so, and then when it gets rejected, you're like, okay, come on now. This is for God, not for me.
Yes.
And then you kind
of
feel bad
when somebody like receives it like joyfully, and especially like when you give something with the word that God also gave you, like, God told me to give this to you, that just adds so much more meaning to it because you know it wasn't just them, it was God. Like, he saw you, he saw your need, he was thinking of you, and he sent someone.
Right.
And so, like, the whole thing is beautiful, like giving and receiving. So we're just learning not to cut it off at either end.
Right.
But it's so different from, like, the way the world operates that it has just taken us some time. Some of that time, I think, you know, we have a little extra time right now, and it's kind of necessary to process all this different ways of living.
Yeah.
You're chuckling when I say extra time because, again, we keep filling our time up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like very much free time.
Right, nowadays. It doesn't. Yeah. Okay, so another thing I noted was that often he'll shrink your supply or allow your supply to be shrank after you've taken a faith jump to see if you're going to press forward or if you're going to run back in fear.
Yeah.
And that definitely happened to us. So it was a jump anyway to have Brett leave his full-time work because at that point, like, I have just a couple little side gigs. Like, we watch my niece and nephew, and we clean a couple places, things like that. I do social media work for a place. But those are very small little chunks. And compared to, like, our needs, our bills, and our grocery needs and things like that, like, not a drop in a bucket. Like, his money from his work was paying for all of that. And ours was just kind of like extra money for things that we needed. And then, so to go to completely no regular full-time income, and that small chunk being the main source already felt like a huge faith jump. But then, like, that amount over the next probably 3 months was cut in half. And so I remember freaking out, like, God, what in the actual heck are you doing to us? Like, that was, I don't know. I just didn't expect it. But then also, like, when I sat down with him, he walked me through it, right? If we're not relying on the money, like, it looked impossible to make it with that number. And it looked just as much impossible to make it with twice than half. Like, either number was ridiculous that we think we could make it on because it wasn't even enough to pay our bills.
Right.
And yet somehow he's provided. And I started trying to write it all down, like, through the process, like, each little miracle he sent. But, like, legit, it was too much to write down, wasn't it?
It was.
And just, like, little things here and there, you know, like an unexpected refund from insurance or like people coming by with food and just blessing us. And so like grocery money that we would normally have to account for, we didn't have to because they just blessed us without us ever saying that we had a need. So, and I'm just trying to think of like other things. I can't even remember, like guitars.
There's
like our son wanted to
yeah.
like learn how to play the guitar, and he was blessed with like not even just one but 3 guitars, and we didn't tell anybody we needed guitars. Like
Right.
it was crazy. And I wish that I wish I did write it all down sometimes, but in the moment it was just like so much. But I know that there's been things like every week, every day that I'm just like, God, you just don't stop.
Sometimes it's better to get into praise than it is to get into a notebook.
Yes. Yes, definitely. It has been.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so I would just encourage anybody who is listening to this and maybe you're intrigued because you're being led to go on your own faith walk.
Yeah.
Don't get fixated on the numbers. Like we had to break our fixation on the numbers to even make that jump. But then it's easy to get fixated on them after and rely on that small number that you have left.
Right.
And it just reminded me of that story in the Bible where God like weeded down the army to 300, like to where it looked absolutely impossible. Actually, was impossible if it weren't for God. And so sometimes that weeding down is him breaking down our self-reliance, breaking down our need to be able to like put it into a formula to where we can manage it. And just like admitting like, God, I don't got this, so I'm totally reliant on you.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing of a faith jump. If we get it plotted out for like the next 20 years, and where's the faith in that? That was laid out, and it says, okay, I accept that plan. That's not how it works. You got to accept the faith jump. So you got to walk with him every day. You have to die to yourself every single day and just take those steps as he tells you to go.
Yeah. Which is funny you say that because I actually wrote down something almost just like that, which was basically like in our lives, sometimes we want to figure it out so that then we can just get on like autopilot and know that it's going to be smooth sailing, right?
Yeah.
But autopilot actually sucks.
Yes, it does.
Even though that's what we tend to kind of want that. So we just know, okay, we're set and now we can just like take it easy. But God wants us to learn how to just like coast in his peace and like trust in him and then trust him like to be there our whole lives, to walk it out step by step with him.
Right.
And let him be the pilot of our lives. So
yeah, and like we spoke earlier about leaving that calendar open, he needs that room to move in our lives. So even though like we're doing things a certain way right now, doesn't mean that's how they're going to be next week, next month. Everything can change, and that's okay because we're doing the walk and we're leaving that calendar open for him to move. Now we have things that we hope that he walks out with us or he sends us in these directions, so we can hope and we can pray for those things, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what's going to come to pass.
Right. Yeah, because like he's kind of given us clues about what might be in our future,
Right.
but even if he asks us during some season, like, Brett, I want you, or Daily and I want you to go back and, you know, dedicate 40 hours of your week to working at this particular place,
Right.
We're not going to panic because he's in control. We've given him the entire calendar.
Well, right. And
So-
when we're praying, we always say that it's his will and not ours.
Right.
So even though we ask for a certain thing, like, hey, I want to do this for the rest of my life. Well, hey, that would be great, but that doesn't mean that's his will, and that might not be what he has for us to do.
Yep. So I think the constant struggle is like not trying to box in what he's doing and what
Right.
we're willing to do.
Right, yep.
Yep. Because you can go either way with that, right?
Yeah,
like, I don't want to leave a job or I don't want to go to a job. And we just have to be willing to do whatever he wants us to do in any given season of
Right.
life.
Yep.
Yep. So,
Well said.
Brett had mentioned just a second ago about how important it is just to leave that time for him, for relationship with him, because like we can't really be directed by him if we're not taking time to listen to him. And I think so many times prayer can turn into just talking, like especially me, I'm kind of a talker, but we can just list off like everything we need or everything we're worried about. And there is like a place for that. God tells us to cast our cares onto him and share our burdens with him. But there also has to be listening involved.
Right.
Because if I'm asking him for the next step of my life, but I'm not listening, it's not going to do me a lot of good, right?
Yeah, it's like when you say, this is what I want in the next season of my life, and then you wait for those particular things, you're probably going to miss out on some blessings.
Right. Yes. And even just like he is the blessing, like just spending time with him and just knowing how he loves us personally and experiencing that, like that's the greatest blessing beyond any financial thing or tangible thing you could buy, any vacation or whatever. He's the blessing. Right. Which brings me to the last point that I wanted to make, that he's taught us, and that's when we go into ministry, we don't just become servants. And I think somebody is watching this today that needs to hear this, because I know I needed to hear it. And I feel like in my relationship with God, I felt like there was a honeymoon period. And then somewhere along the line, I let the enemy tell me that the honeymoon was over and it's time to become the servant. And, time to grow up and be the parent and the servant. But that's not how a marriage works, at least a good one. And it's not how our relationship, our intimate relationship with Jesus works. And I oftentimes best relate my my relationship with God as a marriage with Jesus, because my relationship with my husband parallels it so much. And so he shared with me that we can naturally get into that, like, okay, we're parents now, and lose the romance. But just like we have to cultivate that and like continually nurture our relationship with each other, we have to nurture that with him too.
Right.
And you've seen that like for yourself, haven't you? Mm-hmm. Like it's easy just to get in service mode.
Yeah, it is. Yep. And you can get stuck in that mode too, especially when you put all these expectations on yourself to accomplish certain things, whether it's your day or your week. And then, yeah, you kind of slowly get yourself back into autopilot. And a lot of us, that's where we were before we were set free.
Right. Yeah, which just prompts that verse, like, for freedom I've set you free. Yep. So, like, don't submit to the yoke of slavery again. Like, don't call yourself a slave. Don't see yourself as a slave.
Right.
Don't see yourself as just a servant to him, because ministry, if we let it, can become the same as just any other work.
Sure.
And, we can think, like, so many people need from you, right? And especially as, like, now you're seen as having more time. So many people can need from your time, and that's great. Like, it's great to serve God, but we can't let ministry replace our intimate time with him.
Right.
And actually, the more that we are serving in the church and being pulled from, not just physically, but like emotionally being tugged on, because we're trying to like come alongside others in their burdens, and it can be emotionally taxing. The more that we do that, the more we need that intimate time with him, that quality time,
right,
where we just get filled back up.
Yeah.
So yeah, if anybody's listening, we'll probably do another episode about what that filling looks like for each of us. But maybe you could briefly share like some quick ways that you get filled back up in God personally, so you can keep going and stay passionate in your relationship with him.
Yeah. So the main thing for me is I have to get into maybe not necessarily a quiet place, because sometimes I like to put my AirPods in, and that's not quiet at all. But I like to be into a place where I'm not being distracted by anything else around me, whether it's the kids being loud or just the phone might be going off. And like, oh my gosh, the phone you can just waste so much time on your phone with scrolling videos and all that. So just setting all that aside and getting into the Bible or getting into a book or even just getting into Christian music kind of helps me reset my mind, and then I can get back into this zone to where I'm listening. So I spend time in prayer, and then I do spend time getting into the Bible. But if I don't find that quiet time where I'm not being interrupted by tasks or things that I've committed to, then it's kind of hard for me to hear back from him. So the intimate time for me is to actually throw the AirPods in and just get all distractions, set all distractions aside, and just reset. And this isn't just something that you need to do once a quarter or nothing like that. This is something that needs to happen every day. Every day you need to reset with him. Just like every day you need to have a conversation with your wife. Every day you need to have a conversation with your kids. It's the same thing with God. And he needs to be before all those. He needs you first, and he needs to be put in front of everything. So however that works, and it looks different for so many people, but for me, I have to get all distractions set aside because I'll be sitting there spending time with him and I'll hear Callan making some noise like, oh, I know he's jumping on the furniture. So I can't really have that connection with God if I know that, I got to go up there and deal with that. So that's a distraction.
Yeah. And we almost have to have each other's backs on
We do.
that. Like,
We do.
if I know he's having his time, like, I'm on the kid duty for a while.
Yeah.
And if I'm having my time, like, he's guarding me so that I can.
And I'm fortunate to
that.
have that because obviously not everybody has those perks. But
Right.
it's good to figure out what works for you, that you can make time for God every single day and not just every once in a while.
Yeah. And I would say that's one of the things that actually was most surprising about you coming home. We thought you would naturally just have more of that, but it's not that way, right?
It's
and
not.
I don't know why I was surprised because I know what being at home is like. It's not just sitting still and quiet with kids at home.
Right, and there's so many of the distractions at work too, but my job allowed me to do lots of things where I could throw my AirPods in and I would I'd get into a repetitive thing, whether I'm
and you
drilling
didn't
or
have to be
welding.
responsive. Like if
Yeah,
there wasn't
I
me
could
trying
create-
to talk
yeah.
to you or the kids
Right,
needing
I can
your
create
help.
that time there, and then I come home, it's like, well, I'm way busier now than I ever was when I was working, so it is a lot harder, but it's important to make him a priority no matter what the distractions are, no matter what commitments I've made for the day. He has to come first. And that's very important because I could tell the days that I don't do that and I don't spend the time with him, the quality time, and that's my love language, so I know how important it is to have that quality time. And my day does typically go a lot differently.
Yeah.
It's based on my attitude because I'm lacking something.
And I think I can definitely feel a change from the first few months that you were home. And we weren't intentionally doing that, or we just didn't know we could. We were still trying to figure it all out.
At first, we was ready to all right, we're going to jump in running. Like we need to do this,
like
this.
work. We were thinking about the works we wanted to do, and
it
not.
It wasn't a great start. Like it was good, and we were excited, but it just wasn't working. And like, okay, hold on, slow down. This is not the way it's supposed to look.
But we are flowing so much better as a couple. Of course, we still are not at all alike, so it takes some time sometimes, but we're flowing much better because you're coming from a place of fullness, having that regular time with him, and I am coming from a place of better fullness as I remember to take that time with him. So and when that happens, we just drive a lot better as a couple and as a family. And
some days are easier than others. Some days you wake up in a goofy mood and everything goes well and you're ready to tackle your day the way you should, but then other days you just wake up and for some reason you're in a bad mood, and it is harder to get yourself into those positions, and you got to die to yourself sometimes and figure out what's important.
Yeah. But I think for us, that's a lot of what this podcast is going to be about. We call it the From Full podcast. And literally, to be able to do anything, we have to get to that place of fullness. Right. And so we are constantly going to be going back to that as we encourage you, that we don't want you to do anything in your own strength, because we know how impossible it is. So we just want to remind you, just like we need to remind each other and be reminded that first we have to get our fullness in him. And then we can go out and work just from the overflow, the joy, and the energy that he gives us in that time together. Yep. So I think that's a good place to end it. I could always go on, but there will be more episodes. There will be more. And we're looking forward to sharing those with you soon and hopefully hearing some feedback. Yep.
I will catch y'all later.
Do you want to pray for everybody before we go?
Yeah, we better pray.
Okay.
So, Father, we just thank you for this time that we get to spend talking to anybody who's listening to this right now. And Father, whoever is on the other side listening to this right now, I just pray for them that they could make the time for you and just to not just squeeze you into the schedule that fits their already plotted out routine, but Father, that they could just clear their schedule and just put you, or you put yourself wherever you need to be in their schedule, then everything else will come. Everything else will be a blessing that will surround you. It won't just be, I have time to do this at church because there's nothing else that day. No, Father, they're going to make room for you anywhere, and you could just bless them. So, Father, I just pray that you bless them after they put you first and just help them get through life with you at the center every single day. Just not every once in a while, but every day they could just put you in the center, and their life will just be surrounded by you and your blessings. I pray all this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.